Look who's back. Me. I'm back. But welcome. I hope you guys have been well can be nowadays. So I changed my lighting. My lighting is now a little bit more orangey, more pinkish. I hope it looks better and like a little more warmer, since like my background is a lot of whites and like cool tones. So I hope it's a little more like homey, you know. So today's video is probably like one of the most important videos I have ever made and probably will ever make. I've been wanting to make this video for a minute, but I didn't know when to do it. And then I also like take a long time making videos, as you guys can see. I don't even know when the last time I made a video was, but yeah. So I was like, you know what, I'ma do it. I'ma just do it. Let's just jump into it, shall we? So today's video is about the Tulsa race massacre. So today we're going to Oklahoma, in the city of Tulsa. So what was Black Wall Street? It was a thriving Black community that only stood for a short amount of time, a little more than a decade, and it was home to some of the wealthiest, most educated Black men in the country. This community was started by O.W. Gurley. I hope I'm saying his last name right, Gurley. And Gurley was a very wealthy, self-educated man. So O.W. Gurley bought 40 acres of land west of Tulsa. He and other wealthy Black men decided to name this area Greenwood. Greenwood was designed to be a place where the Black American people could go and establish and grow. Gurley would lend money to people so they could start their own businesses, build their homes. They literally built it from the ground up. Gurley knew that there was little to no chance for people to get any type of loan or money from any white establishment or white owned business. So he really made it easier for people to start their dreams. This community had everything. It was all Black owned. Black owned movie theaters, Black owned grocery stores, restaurants, beauty salons, law firms. They had a school, they had a library, they had their own newspapers, their own hotels, their own hospitals, and more. So another really wealthy man that lived in Greenwood was J.B. Stratford, which was O.W. Gurley's business partner. And Stratford had one of the biggest and luxurious hotels in the country, owned by a Black man. It had 54 rooms. It had a dining hall, a gambling hall. So this neighborhood was growing beautifully. By 1991, they had 10,000 residents, and it was worth around $200,000, which in today's money would be $2.7 million. And I really hope that I made that first part sound nice and happy and motivational, because from here it goes downhill. So they built this community following World War I. So there was a lot of racial tension, and Tulsa became a very segregated city. The KKK establishment was rising again. So Oklahoma became a state in 1907, and the legislature passed Jim Crow laws. So what are Jim Crow laws? They are laws that enforce racial segregation. So what that meant for African Americans was that they could not be in a jury, they could not work in a government office, and they could not vote. So the white community in Tulsa, they were really racist. It just seemed like they just added their own, little laws in there because they just didn't want to be so close to the black community, to the point that they were not, the black people were not allowed to live on the same block as any white person. But now let's get into like the actual case. So on May 30th, 1991, a young black 19-year-old man named Dick Rowland went into the Drexel building in downtown Tulsa. And he was a shoe shiner. He frequented this building and he was given permission to go up to the 3rd floor to the restroom, because yeah, you had to get permission from a white person to go up the building. So he took the elevator. There was one more person in there, and that person was Sarah Page, and she was the elevator operator. No one really knows what happened in the elevator. There was only 2 people, and one of them obviously lied. At some point, Sarah Page screamed. The elevator came to a stop. It opened, and Dick Rowland ran out the elevator. So as we can all guess, Sarah claimed that she was raped. Rowland's grandmother lived in Greenwood, and he was living with her at the time. So he went back home and he spent that night there. But the next morning, June 1st, he was arrested at his grandmother's house. When the white community found out that Rowland allegedly sexually assaulted Sarah, they went crazy. The very next day, the Tulsa Tribune put on their front page that Dick Rowland sexually assaulted Sarah. Sarah never made any type of report or press charges or started a case against Rowland. So while Rowland was in jail, a very large group of white men stood outside the courthouse, and they were protesting and demanding for Rowland to be lynched. Now, the Tulsa police actually did a pretty decent job at guarding and protecting Dick Rowland. Sheriff Willard McClough refused to turn the young man in, and he completely barricaded the floor that he was in, so nobody could touch or reach Dick Rowland. At around 9 p.m. that day, a group of black men from Greenwood went up to the courthouse, and this group included World War I veterans, and they said that they were called by the sheriff himself so they could help guard Dick Rowland. But their help was later denied, and the sheriff said that he never told them to go to the courthouse, even though there were witnesses when he asked them. But later that night, a larger group of men went back to the courthouse. This time it was around 75 men, because they were really worried about Rowland after they heard rumors that the crowd wanted to lynch Rowland. But this time they were greeted by about 1,500 white men that were still standing outside the courthouse. And the white mob only got angrier after they saw them come back. J.B. Stratford was one of the men that went up to the courthouse, and he was trying to act as a peacemaker. He was trying to calm things down, but it was not working. And at one point, one of the white men asked one of the black men from Greenwood to surrender his weapon. The man denied, so at one point a shot was fired. So from there it was pandemonium. A part of the crowd of the white men went to the National Guard armory that was nearby, and they attempted to get more weapons, ammunition, but at that point they were not able to. The group of black men were only outside the courthouse to make sure that nothing happened to Rowland. That was all. But 75 men versus 1,500 men didn't balance out. So they knew they had to leave, and they went back to Greenwood. So them leaving was not enough for the white men. they followed them. They followed them all the way to Greenwood. So the people in the community kind of knew this was going to happen, so they tried to prepare for it as best as they could. They tried to put a barrier at the railroad tracks so they could keep the white men from getting in, but it only stopped them for a short minute. The white men came in armed and ready to attack. They literally fired at everyone and anyone they saw. They literally could be coming out a restaurant, a movie theater, a grocery store, their home, and they would get shot at. At one point, they even set up a machine gun on a hill pointing at a church, and they fired at it, and they went absolutely crazy. They would pull people from out of their homes to kill them in the streets. They would pull people, tie them up, tie them to their car, and drag them. And these people were really hating on this community because these were wealthy black men living better than over here Billy was. So they started taking their valuables. They started taking little jewelry, nice clothing, and all that stuff. 6 planes flew over Greenwood and dropped explosives over their businesses, their homes, and they were also shooting from the windows. They were shooting people from overhead. And now they wanted to claim that these planes were privately owned. Now, Beryl Ford, one of the preeminent historians, said that there was no evidence that the town was attacked by no planes. There was no evidence that any plane dropped any explosives over Greenwood. But yet there's pictures and hundreds of witnesses. So in total, the white mob burned down and destructed 35 blocks of Greenwood. Almost 1,300 homes. They burned down the library, they burned down the schools, they burned down the hospital, churches, they burned down hotels, and many other businesses. When the fire department got to Greenwood, they were threatened and forced to leave by the white rioters. And by the time the National Guard and the governor got to Greenwood and declared martial law, it was too late. Most of Greenwood was already on the ground. Now, the official death toll was 39 deaths, but historians say that up to 300 people were killed that night. Now, while all this violence was happening, residents from Greenwood were being arrested. So more than half of the black community was arrested. 6,000 people were taken, and they were kept for a week. And they had to use multiple locations to keep the people. They had to use a convention center, they had to use a minor baseball league stadium because they took so many people. Now, why did they take them? Basically, the National Guard was told that they started it and were uprising. Obviously, that wasn't the case. It was because they were black. So when they were released, the majority of them had nowhere to go. Their community, their homes, their businesses was pulverized by these white racist haters. A week after the massacre, a grand jury was put together so they could bring some type of justice to the black community of Greenwood. Of course, nothing came out of it. They basically said that Greenwood caused it to themselves. They did file charges against 32 of the white rioters for theft, stealing, but they were never arrested or faced charges for what they did. Obviously, a large part of the community left, including O.W. Gurley and J.B. Stratford. I mean, they had nothing left in Greenwood. Some people did not want to leave, so a lot of them tried to rebuild Greenwood. But the haters were not gonna let that happen. Segregation in Tulsa got so much worse after Black Wall Street was burned down. The Ku Klux Klan establishment was really growing. Tate Berry, a Oklahoma government official who was also in the Ku Klux Klan and participated in the violence, deemed Greenwood unlivable. He wanted the black residents to move. But some of the members of the Greenwood community that did not want to move took this, built a case, and took it to the Supreme Court the following year, as they should have, and they won. These people filed for $1.8 million in property damage, which in today's money would be $26 million. And of course, they wanted this money so they could rebuild their community, but unfortunately, the majority of this money was never given to them. After the riot, they spent 2 years, 2 winters, living in tents. These tents were set up by the Red Cross, and I have to say the Red Cross did try to help these people out, because after all, they did become homeless. Only 2,000 people out of the 10,000 had something left in Greenwood. The people that tried to rebuild kept getting pushed to the side again and again and again with a whole bunch of BS. The Reconstruction Commission, which was made of a whole bunch of white people, they tried to establish a new fire code, but they weren't really trying. They were only trying to buy time by making an excuse so they could take their land. So what was this said fire code for? So the fire code would ban wooden frame houses so they could avoid another tragedy, but that clearly wasn't the problem in the first place. They would have not burned if these white men would have not lit it on fire. So just to put the code in place, it would have taken months, and it also would have made it really hard for them to even build anything. So the city planners saw this, and they saw it as an opportunity, as a chance. They really wanted to do something with this land. They wanted it to be an industrial park. They wanted to put like some type of factory or something of the sort there. But one lawyer from Greenwood, whose business also burned down, heard about this code and wanted to investigate it. His name was Bugsy Franklin. So him and his partners set up a tent and worked from it. They wanted to investigate the fire ordinance. After he did his research and built a case, he took it to the Oklahoma Supreme Court and won. He got the residents an okay to start building again. But the city planners also took some of that space, and they built the Tulsa Union Depot, which was a railroad hub on top of the land that was once occupied by black-owned businesses and homes of the Greenwood residents. A lot of Greenwood was rebuilt, a lot of the restaurants, the homes, one of the movie theaters, one of the churches, but it never went back to its original glory. A lot of the white people took parts of their land and built their own businesses on it as well, and segregated it. And in the 60s, the government took even more space to build a highway over the land, so that messed them up even more. Years, decades passed, and people remained silent. The white community did not want to talk about what happened on June 1st, 1921, and the residents of Greenwood were not allowed to have any type of memorial. The Tulsa Tribune took down everything that had to do with the Tulsa Massacre, including that front page article of the Dick Rowland incident with Sarah Page, which was basically what started it all. The riot was omitted from local, state, and national history. Tulsa like completely erased it from its history. The violence was not talked about, and in the Tulsa Fire Department report, when people tried to talk about it, it was like, nope, 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 that never happened. Till this day, I feel like it's rarely talked about. I didn't learn about it in school. 2021 will mark a century. May 2020, Oklahoma gave an extensive curriculum to the schools in its district, even though it has been in their books since 2009. And they did this on the 99th anniversary of the disaster. And they did this while the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests were going on. So at one point, a young black lady by the name of Mary E. Jones Parrish, who was a survivor of the violence and had moved to New York, she was hired to gather information, reports, pictures, experiences of what happened, as well as talk about her experience. Mary was the first person to write anything about what happened to Black Wall Street. Her book is called Events of the Tulsa Disaster. A lot of survivors tried to talk about what happened. They would give their stories to newspaper outlets, to reporters. The majority would be like, yeah, let's not talk about that. And if any of the reporters or newspapers took their stories, they would do nothing with the information that they were given. The police in Tulsa also claimed that they lost a lot of the reports from that day were removed. On June 1st of 2001, Governor Frank Keating signed the 1921 Tulsa Race Riot Reconciliation Act. And what this did was acknowledge that a riot happened. Even though it was recommended that he provide some type of reparation to the victims and descendants of the victim, he chose not to. Instead, they gave 300 scholarships to descendants of the victims. They made a memorial in Greenwood, but that wasn't until 2010. And economic development in Greenwood. But in February 2003, 5 survivors filed a lawsuit against the city of Tulsa and the state of Oklahoma based on the 2001 Reconciliation Act, saying that they should be compensated as, quote, honor their admitted obligations as detailed in the commission's report. But it was not passed because it was a recommendation, not an obligation, and that a civil case should be filed within 2 years of the event, and by then it had been 80 years. Charles Ogletree, who was part of the legal team representing the 5 survivors, he tried to get the US Congress to pass a bill extending the statute of limitations for that case. Because the state finally recognized the riot, acknowledged the riot, I guess, and because of the exclusion of records about what happened. But it also did not pass, and they kept trying, but it wasn't working. And the survivors, or the descendants of the survivors, were never compensated or given anything by the city of Tulsa or the state of Oklahoma. So what happened to Dick Rowland? So he was released with no charges because, again, Sarah Page never pressed charges. She never even presented herself to talk about what really happened in the elevator. After what happened, Rowland left Tulsa. It is said that he went to Kansas. Other than that, nobody knows what else he did. There are, of course, a lot of rumors guessing what really happened in the elevator. Like I said before, he was on his way to the 3rd floor trying to go to the restroom, and it is said that when the elevator stopped at the 3rd floor, it wasn't leveled to the actual floor, so he probably just, you know, tripped and tried to hold on to Sarah for balance. So this case is very, very sad, very heartbreaking, but it continues, but the disappointment just like continues because racism is still a thing. But there are only 2 remaining survivors. Both of them are over 100 years old, and neither them or their descendants have gotten any type of reparation. It took them almost a century to even acknowledge and admit that a riot happened. Like, that is crazy to think about. 2021 will mark 1 century, 100 years since the Tulsa Race Massacre, and we still have protests against racism. The Black Lives Matter movement should not be happening. People should not have to protest for basic human rights. It's been a century. Why is racism still a problem? Like, it just... But I'm gonna end this video with a quote. It was a quote that I liked. But this quote is by John W. Franklin, and he's a member of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. For years, Black women would see white women walking down the street in their jewelry and snatch it off. I love it. I love it. As they should have. Like, what the fuck? But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was one that it was very hard for me to research, but it was important for me to make. So I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Keep your minds open, and I will see you on my next video. If it doesn't take me another half a year to make it, I'll see you guys later.